So when was the last time you ate something and you actually knew where it came from? I imagine most people, myself being included, um, probably couldn't answer that. Or if they did have an answer, the event would be something that was not a usual occurrence or something that happened a while ago. Um, it's interesting to note that um, we're very removed from the production of the food we eat, sort of the most basic things necessary for our survival. Um, and our removal from the production of the food we eat puts us in danger of losing access to that food, and therefore our own livelihoods being at stake. Um, and this is to say that I believe that our most basic necessity, food, is almost entirely controlled by a global supply chain and a small amount of corporate interests, which the vast majority of people have no control over. Various causes can easily disrupt um, the supply chain and the general economic system and make food less available. And in order to ensure access to food in the event of a disruption in the market, communities and families should strive to produce their own food. Now, um, what sort of event and what kind of disruption in the market, so this is sort of an abstract idea. The market itself is sort of an abstract idea. Um, but how can that affect the day-to-day livelihoods of you or people that you know? One example of something that we've all experienced being coronavirus. Coronavirus had a huge effect on the nation's supply chain and the ability of people to get their own food. Partly, for example, we have the closure of restaurants, schools, and businesses that take in a large amount of food, and as well as farmers markets not being available and things like that. And when stuff like that happens, when things like restaurants get closed down, I mean, a lot of crops like onions, a huge percent of the amount of onions that are produced go straight to restaurants. And when those restaurants get closed down, not that it's necessarily the fault of, the fact that the restaurant has to be closed down in order to save people's lives during COVID, but the market does not give us any sort of security, any sort of backup. There's no sort of comprehensible logic here, and so the market has this failing in which schools, restaurants, and businesses need to close down. And that led to things like in April, the Dairy Farmers in America estimated that farmers were dumping as many as 3.7 million gallons of milk each day, and that a single chicken processor was smashing 750,000 unhatched eggs every week. And so, while the logical solution would be for the government to take up distribution in order to give wasted food to struggling people who, highest unemployment in, history, and in the history of the country, but the government would never do that, as it would damage corporate profits. It would, they need people going into grocery stores and still buying things anyway, even if people have very limited means. Ultimately, this shows us that we cannot trust the state or the market to alleviate food insecurity in the event of a crisis. Another thing would be that could cause market failures or result in food insecurity is climate change. And as climate change worsens, food scarcity is going to skyrocket. And we're going to see a lot of things like that in terms of crop failure, in terms of these large mass industrial food supply institutions, agricultural institutions, not being able to produce what they think that they will be, leading to crop failure due to climatic events that are outside of our control, or are inside of our control in the sense that we can prevent climate change or do what we can to alleviate sort of the already inevitable effects, but will be outside of our control once they actually start taking effect. And then you also have things like natural disasters. And natural disasters we see in California. California has of course, a long history of wildfires, but they're certainly exacerbated by climate change, as well as, we're in the Southeast, we're very acquainted with hurricanes, and things like that pose a huge disruption of the supply chain, and that they can take out highways, trains, shipping, any sort of any sort of things that prevent food from going to its production, to people's homes and to their bodies. Anything that can disrupt that is a liability, and it's something that can damage people's ability to live. And sort of my as someone who studies history, my most important reason for why we should produce our own food and make sure that we have food outside of the control of the market or the state is that history shows us that famines are most often the result of man-made circumstances. One instance could be the Indian and Bangladesh famines that happened throughout British rule in the Indian subcontinent in the 1770s, the 1870s, and 1940s. They were initiated by drought. However, millions of people died because the British government replaced subsistence production with cash crop production. So while there were droughts that initiated the famine, the conditions were far worsened by man-made circumstances, by the circumstances created by the authority. As well in the Irish potato famine of the 1840s, everyone knows. It was basically, in both of these circumstances, you have huge amount of crop failure, but the British government at the same time is exporting in order to maintain the market. And I think the big sort of thing to understand is that no matter what, the market, is going to be maintained no matter what that means. Corporate profits are going to be maintained no matter what. And so people have to sort of strive to provide for themselves. And so various political, economic, and environmental factors can weaken the ability of communities to access food, and this will likely increase in the face of global civil unrest, economic instability, and worsening climate change. And communities need to invest in their own infrastructure of self-sufficiency in order to survive inevitable institutional failures. Thank you.